Welcome to my channel. I'm your host. Today we tell tales of terror from around the globe. From ghosts to goblins, from vampires to vengeful deities, we bring you the best in horror storytelling. And today we have a special treat for those of you who love the macabre. We are bringing you an excerpt from a terrifying new supernatural serial by an author. They say the stones remember. That beneath every cathedral, every abbey, every crumbling chapel of the old world, lie secrets that do not rest, only wait. This tale begins in the village of Alderwick, a name mostly forgotten now, smothered under moss and centuries. But in 1853, it was very much alive, nestled among the moors of Yorkshire like a solemn sigh from the medieval past. Its pride and center was St. Elgiva's church, a brooding Norman relic with a roof of black slate and a tower that pointed to heaven like a warning. The church had stood for over 600 years. It had seen plagues, wars, weddings, and winter burials. But one renovation on one unremarkable Tuesday turned St. Elgiva's from a relic of devotion into a shrine of horror. It began with the removal of pews. The local rector, Father Marin, a man of stiff collars and stiff conscience, had ordered repairs to the woodwork. When the boards were lifted, something was found beneath the nave. Not artifacts, not coins, but something no prayer could bless. Tiny bones, dozens of them. Arranged not chaotically, not in a jumble of time's neglect, but in rows. Parallel, precise rows, wrapped in decayed linen, the remnants of infants. Some so young they bore no teeth, others perhaps weeks old. 47 small bodies in total. No coffins, no markers, just silence. The village recoiled. There was no record in any parish book of a mass burial. No sign of plague, famine, or fire that could explain the sudden deaths of so many children. And why only infants? Why were they hidden beneath the most sacred part of the church? The nave, the very heart where the faithful gathered to hear the word. Father Marin closed the church. For the first time in centuries, St. Elgiva's doors were barred. Rumors began their slow, inevitable drip. The midwife, old Ada Withers, whispered of the wet nurse curse, a legend that if a child suckled from a woman marked by sin, it would wither and die before its name reached God's ears. Others recalled the Black Host, a procession of ghostly infants said to wander the moors at dusk, seeking mothers who had abandoned them. But legends, like fog, can hide more than they reveal. The coroner's office in York dispatched a young examiner, Mr. Elias Benton, to study the remains. He arrived with pencils, measuring calipers, and the solemnity of a man too rational for superstition. But as he documented the first set of bones, he noticed something deeply troubling. Nearly all the infants bore signs of injury. Not disease, not starvation, but violence. Tiny fractures at the base of the skull. Clean, deliberate, almost identical. He didn't sleep that night, nor the next. And on the third day, he left the church mid-examination, took the train to York, and never returned. His final report was brief. 1 page. It read, intentional, repeated, not consistent with childbirth trauma. Recommend further investigation. Strongly advise exhumation of entire nave. But no such exhumation ever took place. The Church of England intervened quietly. A bishop from Lincoln arrived, spoke with Father Marin for hours behind closed doors, and by the next morning the church was reopened. But the pews were never replaced. The floor was resealed in new stone, and beneath it, the dead remained. Something had been buried. Not just the bodies, but the truth. Yet Alderwick changed after that. Nights grew longer. Birds stopped nesting in the eaves. A child disappeared in 1855. A girl named Elsie Penn, last seen picking wildflowers near the churchyard wall. Her shoes were found at the altar steps. No one heard her scream. Father Marin preached that Sunday of sin, of punishment, of hidden wickedness not yet cleansed. He spoke of the innocence of lambs and the rage of a shepherd scorned. But his voice trembled. His eyes would no longer meet the stained glass above the pulpit, the one depicting Saint Elgiva holding a babe in her arms, because he knew then, perhaps he had always known. The question that lingered and still lingers to this day is not simply why the infants were buried, but who placed them there, and what they were hiding from. The day Elsie vanished, the weather broke. Rain lashed the moors for 9 days without pause, and in that wet silence, Alderwick changed. Doors were locked earlier, windows shuttered. The villagers no longer looked one another in the eye. Some said they saw Father Merrin walking the church aisles at midnight, barefoot, his cassock soaked and trailing behind him like a burial shroud. Her name was recorded once on the inn's guest ledger in a curling script: Miss Isolde Trenham, midwife, Whitby. She arrived with a bag of herbs, bundles of wool, and a voice like a church bell heard through fog. The villagers gave her wary glances, but said nothing. They knew the name Trenham. The Trenham women had been midwives for 6 generations. Half healers, half whispers, they lived where land met sea and claimed to know the secrets of both. The water, once clear, began to ripple without wind. The altar candles extinguished themselves mid-sermon. Parishioners stopped coming. They said it felt like something was watching them, listening, waiting. He would pause at the nave, kneel, whisper something inaudible, and press his palms flat against the stones just over the place where the infant bones had been found. When she emerged, her skin looked paler, almost translucent, like paper too long submerged in water. Not mauled, not sick, just lifeless, with their necks gently twisted, arranged in circles, a symbol the villagers did not recognize, but which made Isolde Trenham go pale as frost. But that night he was seen carrying a ledger from the vestry into the woods beyond the church. The book was never recovered. By dawn, he was gone. They met in the church at dusk, sealed the doors, and lit no candles. For 7 nights they remained inside, and each morning the tapping ceased for longer periods. On the 7th night, there was silence. Absolute, the kind that presses on the eardrums like depth. His shoes were found at the edge of the moor, filled with rain. The rest of him? Nothing. The 2 were seen by candlelight, hunched over a blackened book, leather-bound, its spine sewn shut with twine. Only a shallow indentation in the nave's new stones, as if something beneath had pressed upward during the night. Some say it was the Codex Lamentorum, a text outlawed by the Church, said to contain rituals for the silencing of spirits yet unborn. But no one dared knock on Ada's door to ask. They were hidden, she said, to no one in particular. Not buried, hidden. When the sun returned, it brought no warmth, only questions. There was a woman then, not from the village, but she came on foot, as though called by the wind itself. Isolde visited the church alone, without permission. She knelt in the nave for 3 hours, unmoving. That night, she spoke with Ada Withers, the old midwife, who had not left her cottage in years. What came next was worse. By 1871, only 5 families remained, and by 1902, the last cottage was boarded shut. St. Elgiva still stands, its bell long rusted, its windows dark. The nave remains untouched, cold even in summer. 3 weeks after Isolde arrived, a new sound was heard in St. Elgiva's. It began during morning mass, a low, rhythmic tapping from beneath the floor. At first it was dismissed as settling stone or rats, but the taps grew louder, measured, deliberate, always beneath the nave, always in 3s. Tap, tap, tap. Father Merrin, now visibly aged, claimed he heard weeping when he passed the baptismal font. Then came the birds, dead starlings, dozens of them found each morning at the church doors. They've begun to stir, she murmured, and there is not much time. She asked to speak with Father Merrin in private. No one knows what she told him. In his absence, Isolde took charge. She gathered 7 women, all mothers, all older, all touched by grief in some silent way. But silence, in Alderwick, was never a comfort, only a pause. Because on the 8th morning, when the villagers dared open the doors to St. Elgiva's, they found all 7 women gone. No blood, no signs of struggle. In the center lay a lock of hair. Infant hair, curled, soft, impossibly preserved. Miss Isolde Trenham was never seen again. Alderwick fell into ruin not long after. The crops failed. Livestock disappeared. Some say the stones hum, if you listen close enough. A rhythm of 3, tap, tap, tap. There is a reason no one maps Alderwick anymore. Its coordinates have faded from county records. The parish pages end abruptly in 1873, the ink smeared by what archivists called water damage. Though none dared explain why the same page bore 7 perfectly preserved fingerprints, each small round unmistakably, belonging to children no older than a year. The village, it seems, erased itself, or was erased. But not everything forgotten stays gone. In 1936, a team of antiquarians from Cambridge, 4 men and 1 woman, ventured to the ruins of St. Elgiva, under the pretense of ecclesiastical architectural study. In private lectures, he'd spoken of bone crypts, of churches where children were not buried. Its nave was cold, the air within sharper than the moor winds outside. Though the ceiling was cracked and pigeons nested in the rafters, one thing remained pristine: the stone floor of the nave. The lone woman of the group, Margaret Ellison, wrote in her journal, "Crawling along the ceiling above me like wet parchment peeling from beams, perfect, white, sharp. One reached into my mouth and whispered my own name backwards. 13 slate tiles, slightly darker than the others. Lara counted them with trembling fingers. Against every protocol, they pried loose the 13th stone, a slab no larger than a child's grave. Beneath it was not earth, but wood, blackened, charred, a trapdoor, but offered. Their bodies arranged not with reverence, but in patterns echoing long-lost sigils. He ran screaming from the church at dawn, naked, covered in scratches he insisted were made by tiny fingers. They found him 2 days later at a train station, rocking in a corner, muttering a phrase over and over. He believed St. Elgiva's was one such place, perhaps the first. Not built, grown. The bones were infantile. Hundreds of them, twisted together, socket to socket, forming an impossible lattice. The wind ceased. And somewhere, in the deep of the nave above, came the sound. In the center sat a single object, a stone cradle. Empty, but it wasn't the buttresses or bell tower that interested them. And yet, they came. It was a letter, unsigned, found hidden inside a disintegrating hymnal purchased from a second-hand bookshop in York. It read, "They sleep beneath her shadow, where blood never dried. Beware the 13th stone, it still breathes." That was all. No date, no name, just those 13 words. No official records remain. No follow-up study was authorized. It was, again, erased. The leader, Dr. Alaric Hewitt, was a man obsessed with ritual structures in post-Roman Britain, but those closest to him knew he pursued something darker. One by seizure, the other drowned. In 4 inches of holy water, Margaret was never seen again. Only Alaric returned, and he never spoke of what he saw. He lived 30 more years in a sanatorium, mute, carving the same image over and over into his cell wall. A cradle. And beneath it, 13 stones in a circle, always bleeding. They arrived in early spring. The village was gone, overtaken by bramble and gorse, but the church still stood like a half-buried jawbone. "The 13th stone," he whispered. "It is real." On the 3rd night, they camped inside the church. That's when the dreams began. They cry, but not from pain. It's rage. I see them, limbless, faceless. She burned her journal the next morning, but the fire revealed something worse. For beneath the coals, untouched by flame, were 3 infant teeth. One of the men, Wallace Hart, tried to leave. They were never baptized. They were never named. They are not dead. Dr. Hewitt stayed. He ordered the others to begin excavation. They hesitated, but curiosity is the last sin to die. They opened it. The chamber below was no more than 6 feet deep, lined with roots and moss. But in the center stood an altar of bone, and yet warm. The moment they touched it, the lights failed. Tap, tap, tap. The expedition ended that night. 2 died before morning. The site was quietly sealed by order of the church, but not destroyed, because some places cannot be undone. They are wounds in the earth. And wounds, remember? It is said the cradle is still there, beneath the nave, beneath the 13th stone, beneath centuries of dust, denial, and doctrine. And though the trapdoor was sealed with iron, blessed with rites that have no name in the modern tongue, something moves down there. Not with haste, not with malice, but with memory. In 1982, a child named Julian Marin, the last blood heir of Father Elias Marin, returned to Alderwick. He was 24, a postgraduate in folklore studies, and had inherited a box from his grandmother upon her death. The bell tower groaned in the wind. The door to St. Elgiva's was broken, yet strangely warm to the touch. On the first night, he dreamed of water, not drowning, but floating in brackish warmth, wrapped in linen, blind, mouth open in a silent scream. On the second, he heard singing. High, childlike voices, though no language he recognized. On the third, he stopped dreaming altogether. The water was red, not fresh, blood. Something in between, thin as memory, thick as guilt. Inside, the air was heavy, thick as old velvet, and the nave floor bore no dust, as if something passed over it nightly. The 13 stones glistened with condensation that had no source. Inside were only 2 things, a brass key and a letter, yellowed and shaking with ink. Do not seek her. She does not forgive. The stone remembers your blood. Walk away, Julian. Walk away. But he did not. He found the ruins overgrown, yes, but not silent. They brought drones, ground-penetrating radar, and a portable sacrarium. He stayed 3 days, sleeping near the altar, 'cause he woke to find his feet wet. The baptismal font, dry for a century, had overflowed. Julian fled. He contacted diocesan archives, unearthed documents marked with black wax seals. Can traced a pattern. 13 churches across England, each with a missing year in their parish records. In surrounding villages, children have reported dreams of a pale woman humming over a cradle made of teeth. Livestock found missing their tongues. Old churches vandalized, but always the same symbol drawn in ash. 13 stones, circle, a womb, each with a sealed chamber beneath the nave. Each with whispers of vanished children, of bones in walls, of midwives who disappeared without trial, but not far. In the weeks that followed, he became obsessed. Others believe the infants were offerings, not to God, but to something older than him, something that promised fertility in exchange for silence. A pattern not of worship, but of containment. Julian published nothing. He simply disappeared in 1984. But someone read his notes. But a bundle wrapped in cloth, her mouth open not in prayer, but mid-scream. In 2001, private expedition funded by a heritage trust, whose board included names not found in any registry, sent a team to restore the historic structure of St. Elgiva. What they found was never published, but a whistleblower, whose voice was distorted in a grainy interview, spoke only one phrase before walking off camera. It was empty. The cradle was gone. What does it mean for a stone cradle to be missing? What does it mean when infant bones no longer rest where they were laid? Something has changed. Something has awakened. Since that year, sightings have surged. And near Alderwick, which still cannot be found on any GPS device, hikers speak of strange echoes, laughter, or crying, or both at once. There are theories. Of course there are. Some say the church was built atop an older temple, pre-Christian, a site of birthing rituals too ancient to comprehend. And some believe Saint Elgiva herself was no saint. In the oldest depiction, carved above the altar long before the stained glass was added, she holds not a babe. That carving was removed in the 1800s. It now sits in a museum basement, mislabeled. But if you visit, and some do, you can still see the faint carvings around her feet. 13 small skulls, and the words, dormient, sed non mortui. They sleep, but they are not dead. So now you know. Next time you pass an old church and you hear a soft tapping from within the stone, don't listen, because it only taps in threes. Tap, 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 which means it's listening to you.